Welcome to another episode of Keeping It Realty with Marc and Brian. And before we get started, big shout out to East Brother Beer Company for being the show's sponsor. As always, if you listen to the show or if you watch it, we're constantly drinking their beer on the show, and I like it. It's a fun thing to do, and I love their spot.
In fact, I've had to do extra cardio as a result of all the beer drinking we've been doing just to stay fit. Yeah. But it's so good that it's kind of worth it.
Yeah. Well, you work out enough to where this is probably kind of like Gatorade for you.
I wish.
Well, did you see UC Berkeley actually came out with a study where it showed beer during workouts was it would actually rehydrate you better than actual water.
Really? Oh, I'd like to read that study. Yeah. I know a friend of mine who would love that as justification, drink more beer.
Right? I know a lot of people that took that study and they're rolling with it and they don't work out. So we're going to get right into our very first topic. So this is Redfin says Warren's housing plan would help millennials buy homes. So as we know, everyone in the world is running for the Democratic nominee, and Elizabeth Warren has been, I think, trying to get some extra attention on herself and basically came out with a plan to encourage people to buy more homes. One of the biggest issues is that right now it takes an average of 12.9 years for millennials to save up to purchase a property. One of the biggest factors there is because of student loan debt. And I guess her whole proposal here is to eliminate student loan debt to allow millennials to save up faster and buy a property. Now,
and specifically to eliminate student loan debt by forgiving it, or basically, pardoning the debt. And like Marc was saying, there's a lot of different. In fact, how many candidates are currently running right now?
Everyone in America.
Everyone in America. Yeah, there's a lot of candidates. I forget. I think it's like 64 or something like that.
Yeah, 75, something or like 75. That. It's crazy.
And so, point behind that is that I think a lot of them are coming up or creating different platforms to help distinguish themselves from the other candidate. Whether or not they can actually execute on the promise, because obviously politicians are always known for making a promise over promising and not actually delivering. Like, for example, I'm not for it, but Trump never delivered the wall that he wrote his platform on and got him essentially elected. I think a similar situation here in Elizabeth Warren's proposal.
Yeah, so her proposal would basically eliminate student loan debt. It would forgive it, completely wipe it out, and it would take the average 12.9 years in order for a millennial to save up and buy a home down to about 9 years. Now
9 years is still a long time.
It's a very long time, and I think they're missing a few key factors with this plan. Number one, when you think about having to save up for 9 years to simply buy a home, it's still daunting. It's still overwhelming. And for many people out there, 9 years is just as much as 12 years. And I don't think it's really going to do much. And then secondly, you're basically forgiving student loan debt, wiping out this debt. And that's a big problem because you have to understand who actually owns this debt, who actually lent the money out.
Yeah, and again, to put things in context, people go to college, they get student loans. Now, student loans all on its own without this particular plan already has a very, very high default rate. In fact, I know some individuals who want to raise funds to basically bet against the fact that student loans will default because that default rate is so high. Now, in a plan like this, which sounds really great on a political platform, like, oh, I'm going to encourage education by saying, hey, Marc, the money that you loaned me for student loans, Elizabeth Warren says it's completely forgiven. And I know that for most people looking at this, it sounds like a great plan. Hey, let's forgive the student loans. But essentially, you're encouraging students to default on their loan. And when you look at where the source of funds are, most of this money comes from these student loans come from various places like the savings that we put in or other institutions where the individuals who are putting deposits in are into various lending institutions. That money is being lent out to the public to create an interest rate and a return that pays everybody else back. Long story short, I think it's a bad idea after actually reading the whole plan. And it doesn't have a whole lot of substance, especially because it starts off immediately by encouraging somebody to default on a loan, which essentially says that somebody else that made the loan or somebody else's money that put up the money to make the loan is getting not paid back.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about what's going to happen if all of a sudden people are able to take out a student loan and then after they graduate, they can simply have it forgiven because they're now going to buy a home. Well,
not to mention, there's really no way to empirically track or mandate that somebody go buy a house because guess what? You don't owe any more money on your student loan. Great. I think I'll go buy a house. That doesn't necessarily work out that way. Many times that individual who is probably defaulting on their student loan probably wasn't going to buy a house in the first place, in my opinion. They'll probably go on vacation with the money that they didn't have to pay back.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we as a country have put ourselves in a very tough spot here because after World War II, everyone pushed so much for college education. College. That was the thing that was so ingrained into our society, and it became a massive business. You saw the cost of education just skyrocket simply because the demand skyrocketed. Why did the demand skyrocket? It's because it was easier to pay for college.
Yeah.
And that's because of student loans.
I mean, the bell just went off, and long story short, I think it's a bad plan. I think Mark thinks it's a bad plan as well. It's just a way to get attention, to potentially garner votes, to distinguish yourself amongst all the other candidates that are running. And not to mention, the final point is that it doesn't necessarily make somebody buy a home. And it doesn't even address the simple fact that education right now is a bit of a scam because of the cost entailed with getting higher education. Not that higher education is bad, but just the amount of cost to get higher education, that in itself should be corrected. And there's so many other ways that could actually encourage higher education at lower cost of students than simply forgiving or encouraging defaults on loans.
Okay, so the war against Oakland owners of duplexes, triplexes continue. So earlier this year, if you haven't paid attention, what basically happened was there was a real estate agent that got caught in undercover news channel, undercover camera, one of those segments.
We don't have a clip for that, do we?
No, we don't. But basically, just to give you a little history, the agent was doing an open house. The undercover person came in and basically asked the agent point blank, well, I'm looking to move into one of the units. How can I evict people out of this triplex? And the agent went on, completely giving bad information, but completely went on to basically just say, oh yeah, you can evict so-and-so, you can evict them, it's super easy, you just move in, no problem, and basically making it seem like a piece of cake to simply kick someone out into the street. This made it into the news. In fact, the person that she was telling and giving this information to was recording the entire thing. Correct.
With a hidden camera.
And not to mention that the tenant was 10 feet away on her living room couch. Right. So anyway, this sparked a big debate at the city council between tenants, landlords, because historically, when you're a owner of a duplex, triplex, and you want to move into one of the units, you can simply follow their process, but it's a much easier process to follow, and many of the rules that Just Cause comes into play don't apply to duplex and triplexes. Well, that changed in March, and city council basically corrected that. They were calling it a loophole, but that was fixed.
It creates a lot of other problems too, because people who are buying house duplex, triplex, or fourplex, up to a fourplex, they're usually doing so with owner-occupied financing that in itself requires them to move into one of the units. Now, granted, there are people like this lady who was just scamming and trying to use this loophole, if you want, or whatever you want to call it, of owner occupancy to be able to illegally kick people out. Maybe she didn't have any real intention of living there. But the fact is that it's a requirement that a buyer who is buying one of these individual types of up to a 4-unit building live in the place for a while, right? But now that's going to create various issues with their loan, especially because of the level of strengthening that they've had for Just Cause and being able to close this loophole because of the impression that this agent gave on how to exploit the loophole.
Yeah. So that's what happened earlier this year. Now, what many people did not also know is that rent control, when an owner is living inside one of the units of a duplex, triplex, rent control does not apply to those other units. And so that was the second part of what they call a loophole that they wanted to close up. And so basically, that's what this entire battle, it just continues. And tenants basically petitioned the city of Oakland to eliminate that loophole, and now rent control applies to duplexes and triplexes in which an owner resides in one of the units.
Yeah. In fact, what they don't really show a lot of is the other side of that is the majority of owners that are living in a duplex, a triplex, or a fourplex, they are dependent on that additional income to help pay their mortgage. And they're not some, big, gigantic, evil landlord. In fact, there were a few years back when rent control was coming to Richmond, a group called ACE, I believe, which is a pro-tenant group, protested outside of a little old lady's house.
She was 82 years old.
82 years old. Basically was threatening and intimidating this owner, 82-year-old woman who lived in her home, because she was attempting to evict a tenant from her duplex, or it might have been a triplex. Do you recall what it was?
It was a four-unit building.
Four-unit building.
Four-unit building, and she was attempting to evict one of the tenants who was behind 2 months on rent.
Right, and she would have had every right to do so. In fact, the just cause would have been in effect, even had that law. That at the time the law wasn't in place, but had it been in effect, that there would have been issues that would have allowed her to do that, if not for the fact that you had this group intimidating her. And that's usually, they never show that side, but they always show the other side of it, where somebody does ruin it for everybody else and exploit the law, and then now it makes it that much more difficult to protect the individuals who those laws were made for, namely the small landlord dependent on that additional rental unit to help pay their mortgage. Which makes it more difficult when you try to evict somebody who's not paying, and now the law has so much more teeth behind it.
Yeah, and many tenants don't realize that property owners have so many expenses that they have to deal with. Just quickly, they have increasing garbage bills, increasing water bills, additional tax supplements and assessments that are added to their property tax bill. I mean, those are just a few. Then you have repairs, maintenance, and it just goes on and on. But speaking of the few that are bad, that ruin it for everyone else, this leads us into our very next topic, which is a Vallejo rent spike, which is unheard of in the city of Vallejo. And stuff like this pisses me off. And I hate this because it's poorly done. It's a horrible mismanagement of client funds, investor funds, or if it's their own company. This is just really stupid. So there's a complex, 75 unit and 60 unit complex?
It's actually two different complexes, both purchased by what we believe is the Reliant Group. On public record, it's shown up as the Cap 9 Vallejo 2 LLC, which I guess is AKA Reliant Group, which is one of their single asset LLCs that they probably use to hold property. And what the group did is they bought a 64-unit building on 154 Richardson Drive, in otherwise known as Strawberry Hill Apartments. And the other property that they purchased was the Holiday Gardens, which is a 90-unit building on 19 Panorama Drive, not too far from the 64-unit.
So what essentially happened here is they bought the building. Most of the rents for a two-bedroom were about $900, $950. Now, those are below market. Right now, Vallejo is getting about $1,500 to $1,700 for two-bedroom apartments. And what they did was they just gave them a notice to take them from $900 to $950 upwards to $1,650, $1,700. I want to say it was maybe even $1,800 in one case. So they essentially just doubled the rent and gave them notice.
Yeah.
And that's just horrible. I mean, there's a few things to discuss here. Number one, you're going to end up with a lot of vacancies. Their argument is that they're going to go through and remodel the entire building. But I just can't imagine the numbers are working out. I mean, what did they buy it for?
So I actually went and dug a little bit and looked at public records, pulled up information on CoStar. Now, a couple of to set the premise for a couple of things. The news clip or article was stating that the rents were doubled. Currently, right now, we have a rent gouging law in effect, so that you're not allowed to increase the rents greater than 10%. But very specifically, what was alleged was that these rents went from $895 to like $1,900. within less than a 1 year period of time. So that's doubling your rent, which again technically is illegal right now. And in fact, we were speculating different ways as to how they were able to get away with that, or if it's even legal. Because there's even the case of the Marin woman who increased her rent 40%.
40%
went to jail.
In jail, yeah.
She's in jail.
Many people don't know that price gouging laws are in effect right now for the entire state of California. Now, there's some people that will argue it only applies to certain counties that are affected by the state of emergency issued by the governor. But the state attorney general came out and says, no, I interpret this as applying to the entire state of California. So technically, there is a 10% cap on rental housing rent increases throughout the entire state of California. If you violate that, it does come with civil and criminal penalties, and it was set to expire May 31st. And
Gavin Newsom just
extended to December 31st of 2019. And I'm not sure quite when they gave notice, but my guess is with the news article just coming out recently, it might have been in the last week or two. Maybe they were banking on it not being renewed, and Gavin Newsom renewed it anyway. But
it could be the case.
Yeah, there could be a case for price gouging violations.
So I did a little bit of research on one of them. Remember, they bought 2 buildings, and the one that I did the quick research on was the 64-unit building on Strawberry Hill. Now, the information I have on CoStar shows that it was comprised of 34 one-bedroom units at an average of $640 a square foot, and 30 two-bedroom, one-bath units at an average of 915 square feet. Now, on CoStar, it shows that the actual rent at the time was $1,682 for a 640-unit one-bedroom and $1,900 for a 915 square foot two-bedroom. I ran it based on what if the 34 one-bedrooms were at $895, and what if the 32 bedroom units were all at currently $950, which is what was alleged on the news. Now, had that been the case, on public record, it shows that the building closed escrow for $10,100,000. Now, interestingly enough, the company that bought it, Reliant Group, is known for purchasing affordable housing or making rent affordable. Now, that all said, when I looked at the loan amount that closed just in February of this year, it was a grand total of $8,900,000. So if you do the quick math on that, these buyers came in with a down payment of essentially 11.88%. So you're wondering, how is that possible on commercial property that's 5 units or more, especially when a lender typically wants a 1.2 debt service coverage ratio? Now, if you recall in a prior episode, I'd mentioned that the higher the loan amount, the lower the interest rate. Now, also, another clue that I got here was the very low down payment scenario that would indicate that they probably use some type of an FHA financing to buy commercial property. Yes, you can actually use FHA or Federal Housing Administration backed loans to purchase commercial property. And if that is the case, they would have probably got a rate as low as 2%. At least that was the number that I was backing into in order for the property to be able to at least debt service coverage at a 1.01. And now this is only in the event that all of the units were at the previously low rental rate of $895 for a 1 and $950 for a 2-bedroom. On CoStar, it shows that they were already being rented out at the higher amount. So again, this could be a case of a few of the tenants were at that very low rent and they were jumped up really high, but the majority of the tenants in that complex were at the higher rents already. And again, I don't have all the clear picture, so I'm just kind of figuring all these things out. So if these rents were at the lower dollar amount that I stipulated, and they were able to get this low down payment scenario with an extremely favorable interest rate, they could have actually just gone through and did typical 10% rental increases, and they would have been able to go to an immediate 1.2 or 1.3 debt service coverage ratio where they were immediately profitable. However, if they turned around and they did break the rent control laws, and exceeded it by 10% by taking a $895 unit and now making it $1,600, essentially doubling it within a less than 1 year period, then they would have immediately jumped from a 1.0 debt service, which means that they would have been breaking even, which some lenders will allow people to do if they have a lot of, if there are personal guarantees, if there's a lot of liquidity, if they're a very well-known buyer, like this group probably was, and they would have jumped to an immediate 2.47% debt service, which means they would have been really profitable. They would have been 247% greater than their proposed mortgage. In essence, they would have gone from the low rents, which would have put them at about a 3.96 cap rate, and they would have immediately jumped to a 9.66 cap rate in less than a year, right? If all these things were the case, essentially taking their break-even income after all expenses and running it at roughly 40% operating expenses, and then if this is the case where they actually took an average 895 and jumped it to 1600 and an average of $950 and jumped it to 1900, then they would have gone from a break-even to $48,000 of cash flow after paying a debt service per month to $580,000 a year to an immediate 56.68% ROI. They would have just, there's a couple of things here that just aren't adding up, and I don't have the complete picture because they would be extremely greedy to just jump that high. And yeah, it sounds like they would have an extreme case for a lawsuit.
Yeah.
Especially since, typically what we always encourage is just have a balance between what you're allowed to do, buying properly where you're actually having a profit, but you're not gouging everybody. There's nothing wrong with making a profit. That's what the country is based on. But there is a big problem when you're just doing it too quickly and at the expense of too many people at the same time. And again, the financial picture that I can just kind of piece together from public records, from historical data, and then looking at what the type of loan and the debt, the loan to value of the loan and their purchase price that shows up on public record, that 90% or 89%. This sounds like a company that got a lot of purse handed to them, low interest rates, low down payment, and I think they went a little too aggressive on the rental increases, which is probably why they're on the news.
Yeah. Okay, so our next topic is maintaining the team. So Brian and I get asked these questions sometimes because both of us have basically built companies, built teams. And question number one is, describe how you keep your real estate team productive and morale high.
Well, we employ beer. Just a quick
step
plug.
Number one, get a beer sponsor.
Just a quick plug there for East Brothers Beer. No, we don't actually use beer or anything like that. The question again is, how do you maintain the morale, right?
Yeah. How do you keep your real estate team productive and morale high?
Well, it's very important to lead by example, in my opinion, right? And I think you do the same thing, where a lot of leaders in a business will more or less kind of never show up to work, delegate a lot of the work to everybody else, and then half the time they're off golfing. So I think to keep the team productive, you kind of have to be able to outline a set of tasks that the rest of the team can do. They kind of trickle back up, but also involve you as the leader to keep things going and leading by example.
Yeah, I think what you're explaining there is culture, right? Culture comes from top down. And if you are the CEO, the founder of a company or business, I mean, you literally set the culture. And if your culture is working hard, being productive, coming in with high morale every single day, your employees feed off of that. Assistants, helpers, even vendors and people that you work with that simply maybe come in to visit you or pick up a check or whatever, that you feed off that energy. So I think it starts from top down.
Right. And just kind of segueing off of that, when a lot of times when you're leading a team, a lot of times people think that being the leader involves just barking out a lot of commands and things like that. But literally, being a leader half the time is serving the people or serving the rest of the team. So you
literally work for the employees. I mean, that's literally what you're doing as a top leader. And one of the things that I've always tried to do in my business is really look at everyone that works for me and how can I help them improve? How can I help them get to goals where they want to be at, right? It's not just about me, because the more I help other people get
the
to
more efficient
levels,
you become.
The more efficient, the more they work. And then at the end of the day, you never know where that leads.
Right.
They may end up starting the business that supplements your business, or they may start a business, you partner up with them, or even invest in their company. There's a lot of different opportunities that come into play, which, going to the next question, how do you deal with a long-time, well-liked, or valued team member leaving the company?
Well, it really depends on how the valued team member leaves the company. So I've had the fortune of having, people, stay with me for like 10 years, 15 years, 19 years. And a lot of the times, whenever somebody does leave, they've been here in excess of like 10 years. So like recently we just had a broker leave who's been with me for over 10 years, and he started his own company. And so, it was sad to see him go because we were close, but at the same time we threw him a party, wished him well, and, and everything goes well. And at the same time, conversely, he was very upfront about it. He knew what was going on. There was no underhandedness to it that would indicate that he was, stealing proprietary information or trying to take clients away, which again just kind of leaves a bad taste in everybody's mouth, whether I'm trying to steal his clients or he's trying to steal mine. And so again, it all depends on how they left. If it was under the cover of night and there was a lot of suspicion, it could be very different from having it all up front and just kind of, saying your goodbyes nicely and peacefully.
I think the more you support your employees, the staff, the agents that work for your company, the more you support them in what they want to do, you're naturally going to have some of them, including some of the top people that work for you, go leave and start their own thing, work for a different company. But you never want to burn bridges. You always want to keep those bridges connected, because you never know when they come back and say, hey, I've got a great referral, something to help out the business. And those connections really matter. I mean, if you look at old business is all networking, it's all connections, it's who you know. And if you're curating within your own company and business, if you're curating a lot of people that eventually go out into the world, they leave your company, but they use your company as a stepping stone for other big places, all of a sudden you start developing a big network of people that are still loyal to you because they appreciate that. I had, back in the REOs, I had one of my BPO analysts basically use the job to then take it as a stepping stone to BlackRock.
Wow.
You
Nice.
know?
Yeah.
And so now I've got a connection to BlackRock, right?
Yeah.
And you always want to support people, because at the end of the day, they at some point will want to return the favor and help you out.
Yeah. And usually, like, again, when you've got a client and there's a specific listing and you have this long-term relationship and everything went well, it's usually a good segue into getting your offer accepted above everybody else. And sometimes these past employees do come back. I've actually had people leave, start their own company, and then after like 6 years of running their own company, they're like, hey, can we come back? And they did. And, it's all honky-dory. So I've actually had that opportunity where some have left, and, like you said, we're collaborating on other things. Some have left and come back. And I've also had the negative side where I've had people leave and then they left such a negative taste in my mouth, at which point I literally just cut them off and don't answer calls, and I'm doing push-ups or something instead while they're calling.
So if you have any questions, if you have a property you want us to analyze, contact us. Our phone numbers are on the show title in the description, and also our email. So hit us up, send us a DM. Thank you for listening. Make sure to subscribe to all the different channels, and have a good day. And thanks to East Brother Beer.
Yeah, I was gonna say we can always add that back.
I thought it was the
no, that was just
the strawberry.
That was a quick and dirty.
Oh man, you did a whole property analysis on that one. That's why I was all confused.
Oh, I have another one. You could stop. We can cut it here and go again.
Up to you at this point.
I was gonna just throw the analysis on the 32 unit that we walked through yesterday.
Okay.
I'm gonna run through it.
5 minutes instead of 10.
Yeah, it'll go quick. I don't know. It's up to you. You guys want to do it?
Yeah, we can do it. I mean, we're ready filming.
Okay.
We can still end the show and then just have another.
You want to edit this part out that we're all talking?
No, it's just
keep rolling with it.
Sure. All right. So, quick.
5 minutes.
5 minutes. So, for the property analysis this week, we're going to be looking at a 32-unit building in North Highlands, which is which is north of Sacramento, or downtown Sacramento. It's actually still technically part of Sacramento County, but it's it's distinguished itself from Sacramento as the North Highlands. Now, a couple of particular things about this 32-unit building. This one is currently on the market, and it's been on the market for a while. And it's actually a property that I'm actually looking at for myself. I have to buy a $3.1 million property or larger, because I have a couple $1 million coming out of a 1031 exchange. Hasn't closed yet, but I'm already looking to place the money to make sure I don't get heavily taxed. And like I've said in prior episodes, a lot of times I'll run depreciation calculations, and after a certain point when my depreciation's out, I'll start looking at the possibility of unloading the property and exchanging it to something else and having the privilege of being able to wipe out my ordinary income and capital gain all over again. So in particular, this 32-unit building that I'm looking at, in fact, Mark and I were at the property yesterday doing the walkthrough. Was it yesterday? No, it was Monday.
It was Monday.
It was Monday.
But you know what? A lot of people don't know this, is that if you contact me, I will do the walkthrough with you, whether it's initial walkthrough or the actual home inspection or whatever's going on with the property unit. I'll walk through it and then give you my opinion on, from a management perspective, on what needs to be done.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, that was the whole reason of going through it. As I run my numbers based upon, in this case, the listing agent, past listing, an agent that I've done a lot of business with in Sacramento, he'd actually sent me 36 months trailing, which is 33 years worth of data on operating expenses and income that I can kind of look through and audit. And based on that, I was able to go through, get a letter of intent from a lender to make sure that this is something that they would make a loan on. And then the other sweet aspect of this is the property currently asking $3,350,000. I can pick it up for $200,000 less than what he's asking. This is some insider information from the listing agent that the owner allowed him to give out, because the owner in this particular case also is in the position where they've depreciated. They've taken all the depreciation out of the property they could take. They're kind of retired. They're moved on to Nevada, and they are actually in a position where they could sell it, have a huge capital gain, defer it, and then put that into some other performing property someplace else. So again, we talked about how the market's slowing down. These are these opportunities where a property that was once asking a 5% cap rate is now beginning to, or willing to, unload it at close to a 6 cap. The property itself was advertised at a 6 cap, but after I ran my numbers, even at the $200,000 reduction in price, I was getting closer to a 5.88 cap. So again, it's still the high fives, but not quite a 6. But regardless, taking any property where you can reduce the price $200,000 because the timing is just right is always something to look very closely at. And this is something that owners out there that might be deciding, well, should I sell my multifamily building or not? I have cash flow from it, but I don't have write-off. You might be selling it at a lower price in this particular market now, but at the same time, those same dollars that you're going to be yielding from the sale of that property, you'll be rolling into a property that immediately starts at a higher cap rate. So, long story short, you'll be able to use it on a property where you might be able to get a discount as well on what it was previously asking 6 months before or even 18 months before. So long story short, at a $3,150,000 purchase price with a 30% down payment, running it at the current income of roughly $28,000 a month, $339,000 a year, and then of course after taking a vacancy factor of 5%, which by the way, that's the 5% vacancy factor that you have to use when underwriting a property for a loan. The actual effective vacancy might be 0, or the market vacancy might even be less than that. For example, if I took the market vacancy in that area, it would be closer to 3. And again, these little minute changes make a huge difference not only in cash flow, but valuation. So when I apply a 5% vacancy, I run the expenses from the 24-month trailing. Essentially, I'm running the building at a 45% operating expense. At a $3,150,000 down payment, I'm still starting out at a 1.33 debt service coverage and a 5.88 cap rate. So let's put that in perspective. After I apply the interest rate to the 70% loan amount of a $3,150,000 loan, the net operating income is still 133% greater than the proposed mortgage, which means there's an immediate profit and a return on investment of 8.8%, 8.08%. So let's put that in perspective. $3,150,000 purchase price you need about $980,000 to get it because of the down payment and the closing cost. And so the return on investment would be based on the $79,296 a year that it would be making after paying debt service. And so $79,296 over a out-of-pocket investment of $980,000, a little under $1 million, turns into an 8% return that, because of the cost basis of the property or the purchase price of $3,180,000, would still put off a straight line depreciation before all the fancy accelerated depreciation is applied, a straight line depreciation of $91,616. So you have a $79,000 profit, but a almost $92,000 tax write-off. So on paper, you have a $12,000 loss while still making an 8% return. So that 8% return is actually higher because it doesn't involve taxation. And again, this is the main reason why people will sell properties they've had for years that has a cash flow, but potentially roll that equity into another income-producing property where they're starting their depreciation all over again. Of course, they'll take into consideration the cash flow they gave up versus the new cash flow they're making sure that they're at least equal to or greater than what they're giving up. But now with the component of the tax write-off, now they're keeping more because of the fact, simply put, it's not what you make, it's what you keep that really matters. And again, if you apply all the regular increases of rent to the property, which in this case, I only applied 7% rental increases. I applied 7% rental increases for the simple fact that that's what we're kind of anticipating with other rent control laws that are potentially down the pipe, which is talk for another episode. But if I apply a 7% rental increase, which actually will probably be closer to a 10% because it's a 7% rental increase plus a CPI application to it is what is currently on the ballot, then I'm still looking at a property that's jumping from a 5.88 to a 6.56 cap rate to a 7.28 cap rate to an 8.06 cap rate by hopefully 2022, which essentially means that the property could have an unrealized gain of roughly $1,082,000 within roughly a 4-year period of time. Unrealized because, of course, you'd have to sell the property at that time, unload the cash flow, 1031 exchange it into something else, and yada yada. Now, there's a couple of pictures that I put up of the property. One of the other ancillary value adds about the property is if you look at it from an aerial standpoint, you'll notice that the property actually it's one big lot that's in the middle of 4 different streets. So there's not a lot of bordering properties except for a small sliver property. So what's kind of cool about that is not only will the property be a place to park my capital gain from a previously sold property while simultaneously sheltering the cash flow that I'm making from it, but it's actually that cash flow that I don't actually need, I could use towards soft costs or architectural fees to potentially re-entitle that property and double the unit count that's currently there. Again, I'm not going to get into that right now. That's another topic for another time. But these are different things that I particularly look at as value adds whenever I'm looking at investing property.
This is why everyone needs to work with Brian, because he literally can't stop talking about this, even with 2 bells going off.
Sorry about
that. He literally lives and breathes real estate investment. So thank you for watching an episode of Keeping It Realty, or listening if you're on the podcast. Make sure to subscribe, and thank you to East Brother Beer.
Thank you to East Brother Beer. It's good for company unity.
And real estate analysis.
And real estate analysis.